you already make enough money, the last thing you want to do is charge more for your services.
Hey everybody, before we start this episode, a quick shout out to our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by the Perfect RIA. How could it not be brought to you by the Perfect RIA? But if you enjoy these episodes, if you think that Micah and I, or at least Micah, have some great advice to give, head over to our website, theperfectria.com, and download one of our free guides towards making your practice better. So it's not just the things you hear on the podcast, it's the things that you implement. And if you're saying, you know what I'd really like to get in a room with Matt and Micah. I'd really like to ask them my own questions. I'd like to be coached by them. Then send an email to lifestyle@theperfectria.com, and one of our great team members will reach out to you and tell you more about the program. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Perfect RIA podcast. I'm your co-host, Matthew Jarvis, and with me, as usual, to welcome in this new year, the man, the myth, the legend, Micah Shalansky. Micah, how are you, my friend?
Oh, Jarvis is doing absolutely fantastic. Excited to kick off into 2024. We have some exciting things coming up this year. And really, I mean, this is a great time, one, not to do your New Year's resolutions because you don't do those anyways, but to actually make some really fun changes and sticky changes that are going to last us throughout this entire year. So I'm excited about it.
Well, Mike, I've got a fun thing I have not shared with you. One of the things I got for Christmas, I'm going to assume your parents did this as well because it's kind of a generational thing. But for those of you listening, not watching, we all remember, I think we do, the world's smallest violin, right? You would rub your fingers together and say, this is the world's smallest violin. It's how you would mock people's problems, right?
My dad did it to me the other day, actually. So fun.
Did he really? Well, so for Christmas, Jackie bought me a 1-inch tall violin that has a bow and is electronic and it plays like My Heart Mourns or something like that. So it's the funniest thing. So I have the world's smallest violin. But Mike, I'm thinking we need to get miniature value sledgehammers and send them to people that are doing a bad job. That are doing a bad job with value. Like, hey, we found a sledgehammer that represents the value you are providing. Here it goes. You don't
piss enough people off on LinkedIn. We're now going to start mailing people directly this. That's going to be fantastic. Fantastic.
Well, speaking of upsetting people, I got to confess, this episode is going to potentially upset a lot of people because we're going to poke at something that's very near and dear to everyone's heart. And it's something, if I'm being honest, Micah, I often try to sweep under the rug myself. In fact, it's when we come up to our personal masterminds, right? We have an Invictus mastermind coming up in a few weeks. You and I have our own mastermind coming up in the end of May. When I'm running up to those, I'm thinking, oh crap, I got to look back through my P&L because I got to show this to all my peers and all that stuff that I haven't been worrying about because it's not that big of a deal, blah, blah, blah. Like, Micah's going to see this stuff. My buddy's going to see this stuff. They're going to pick this apart. And not from a malicious standpoint, but just like, hey, quit telling yourself stories about this thing.
Yeah, and that's one we're super easy to get defensive about, right? I never do this, so I'm just going to say Jarvis is the only one that does this, right? But when we sweep those... Yeah, sure. Let's go with that. But when we sweep these expenses under the rug, we justify them. When we spend money, we justify it. When we charge a fee, we discount a fee. We do one of those things. We're always justifying these actions. But then when you have to be responsible, right, to those justifications, now it's your mastermind group. I mean, what are they going to do? Say, knock it off. It's your practice to do what you want. But getting called out on these shenanigans that we play. Now, this isn't hurting clients. This isn't anything of this nature, right? But it's not running an effective business, which has a cost. And that's what we're going to talk about in today's episode. And so there's going to be some things that are going to rub you wrong, especially with the culture that's real out there that in order to make money, you must have done something evil, right? Which could not be further from the truth. I mean, short of taking money from people at the point of a gun, taxation. That's not, that's right. Short of that taking place, if you are making money in a capitalistic society that has values inside of it, as ours does, this means you're adding tremendous amount of value to clients. You're able to do some really great things. And Jarvis, one of the things that I really enjoy about looking at fee schedules and profitabilities of advisors, this is really clear. This is my objective measurement of the value in which they're delivering. So value is very subjective, right? Okay, we have our value sledgehammers, we have our DMV, right? We have our quarterly value adds, we send out all this. These are all subjective. What's objective? Well, when a client hires me at a premium fee to deliver a service they could have got online for a fraction of the price, or from another advisor potentially listening to this podcast for a fraction of the price, clearly what they are saying is Micah's delivering more value than these other people. Now, you may not like that. They may not sit well with you. Get over it. That's what's happening in this transaction. And so I like looking at these details because I want to know, how do I improve that value I'm delivering to clients? It's not about making more money. It's how do I deliver the value? Money's a way in which we can measure this.
Micah, there's like 4 one-star reviews on the podcast. Now there's hundreds of 5-star reviews. And by the way, really appreciate those 5-star reviews. In fact, if you haven't voted recently, go ahead and put those 5-star reviews in. But there's always like one clown who goes on here. who goes in and says like, these guys are just focused on doing the least amount of work and making the most amount of money. And that's not the case at all. We're focused on delivering as much value as we possibly can in a highly profitable, highly efficient way. Why does that matter? Like a recent example that came up in a discussion I had with an advisor. Actually, I was inviting a different advisor to step into the value smackdown ring with me. We only ever had one taker on it. It was a great episode. And I said, there's no way I can't crush this guy because I spend more on personal development each year than he earns, right? So when we look and say, why do you need a healthy profit margin? I think there's two really critical reasons. One, you need a healthy profit margin so you can afford the best professional development there is. I'll give a shameless plug for our Invictus coaching program, but there are other options as well. The other is you have to be ready to weather the storm. Short of your entire practice being in indexed annuities or something, if you're doing any kind of AUM model, or even any kind of fee model, you're going to see volatility in your fees, aka you're going to see your revenue goes down. And if you're running at a 10% margin or a 20 or a 30% margin, and the market takes a 50% hit again, now I'm looking clients in the eyes, I'm trying to talk them off the ledge, but I'm on the ledge myself. Like I'm getting ready to be pushed off because now we're losing money. So this profitability, yes, does it benefit me? Does it improve my family's finances and my well-being? Yeah, it does. Does it make me a better advisor? 100%.
Yeah, and I think the further we get from 2008, Jarvis, the more people are just absolutely forgetting about this time period because the markets go down for 20%, then they recover within 4 months. And so it's a blip on the radar.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah. Right? The year before that, right? Like all of these things that we could just clearly kind of look at and see this volatility which is taking place. And you're not worried about it because it's one quarter and then you recovered and it's fine. But back to your point, I really want to harp home on this, whether it is a 2000 incident, whether it's a 2008 incident, or we can go back further in time if you want to as well. Yeah. But when the market is down for multiple years at a time at massive losses, isn't 50%, right? This really impacts your financial advisor practice and what you can do. Are you not going to have a paycheck? Is your team not going to have a paycheck? Who are you going to lay off? Now, if I'm laying somebody off because they're not performing their job duties, I'm sorry, that's firing them. If I'm firing them, they should have done their job, right? This was what was supposed to take in place. I need to take some responsibility. Did I have good leadership, etc.? Assuming that was there, they didn't do their job. I'm firing them. I'm moving on with life. If I have to lay someone off because I have made poor financial decisions and did not prepare for the upcoming storm that we tell clients is coming up, and I chose not to prepare for it, that's a failure on me and on my end right there. Why am I profitable in certain ways? I know this will happen again, and I don't want to have to lay off my team because this took place.
Yeah, interesting side note on that, Micah. When the COVID crisis was going on, when the government shut down the entire economy and the markets collapsed, I had several team members on my team. They were pretty nervous about it. They wondered, because everybody was nervous about it, right? It was a chaotic time.
Sure.
And they were wondering like, hey, is this going to, are we going to get laid off, right? Because they're hearing about all this. And of course, at the time, people were saying the world was going to end. And so I took a minute to go through and write guardrails for my practice so that my team knew we were in a financially secure spot. And so I really went through, and I'll have to go pull up the numbers because it was kind of interesting. And I told them the market would have to get cut in half twice. So it'd have to be a quarter of its current level before anyone's payroll would be impacted. Right. And then that gave them so much relief, right? Because our team also are human, right? They also see the market go up and down. Am I not going to get paid? But so that's a big issue, right, Micah? So we understand that practices need to be profitable. If you don't understand that, you're probably listening to the wrong podcast. How do we make practices profitable? You and I, Micah, we've looked at, well over 1,000 practice financial statements now. And there are advisors running crazy high profit margins on $200,000 of revenue. And there are advisors that are not running any profits on $3 million of revenue. And everything in between. By the way, it's the same thing we see with clients, right? We see clients that are living an amazing life on $30,000 a year. And you're like, how are you doing that? And then we have clients that are doctors, they're living on $600 a year, and they're maxed out on their credit cards. So
yeah, they can't spend any more on their credit cards. They don't know how they're going to pay for things, right? And they have all this money that's coming in. Yeah. I was going to say, on those points, as we kind of look at them, right, it's just like anything else is saying, all right, how disciplined are you going to be in these things? And when it comes down to it, a lot of this comes into tolerance and delayed gratification. Are you just going to blow all the money in your checking account because that's your habit and that's what you do? Or are you going to put some policies in place on kind of how to run that? So are you going to be a good financial planning client, not just a good financial planner? It's kind of one big question out there. Hint, most of you are not good financial planning clients because I see your finances, right? Now, been there, done that, right? I'm not the pot calling the kettle black here, but we got to make a decision about doing the right financial thing, not justifying, hey, I'll probably have money in the future, so I'm going to blow all of it now. As we're building this up, there's a lot of different ways that you can do this. One of the ways is start super small. And this is something actually I recommend to clients that are kind of overspenders as well. One, cancel or change the credit card number for whatever your primary business card is, change the account number, call up Bank of America, whomever, and say, I lost my credit card. They'll issue a new one. It's automatically going to cancel all those auto pays that you have. And then stop paying them. Right? And then see what you actually need in your practice, because you got a lot of little things that are on there, which are just draining the bank accounts, which are costing the profitability. So once a year, you should change your credit card number. If you think it's a pain in the butt, it is. These solutions aren't always easy, but they are super effective. And all of a sudden, you're going to find a lot more money that expenses you don't have.
Now, quick point of clarification, just in case someone misunderstood this. We're not suggesting that you not pay your bills. That's not the case here. What we're suggesting is let's create a forcing mechanism where we have to go back through and look at every expense and say, Mike, I ran into one the other day. I was doing, we're going to talk about this in a minute, on a quarterly basis, I go back through and I spot check all the credit card transactions across all of my credit cards, which are several, right? Not just personal, but my professional ones as well. So I'm looking through, I find one, there's a charge for $1.99 a month. It's been going on for several months. No one knew what it was. There was some app that someone had subscribed to through our company. Great. That's an example of, now you might think $1.99, that's not a big deal. Well, it is, because it's representative of transactions sneaking through that just don't belong there. This wasn't a fraudulent transaction. I eventually found out who had subscribed to it. They thought it was a useful app. They quit using it after 3 days, and they never went back through and canceled it, right? So that's a really small one. But think about other things that you're paying hundreds or thousands of dollars for, software programs that you never use or that you really don't need, because now Microsoft does it or Google does it. You don't need to be paying for something else. So yeah, cancel that card, see what happens, see what things you really don't need.
Yeah, and if something is like a deal breaker, all of a sudden your phone system doesn't work. All right, let's make sure you're on that, right? Or if you got to finish out a contract, but then have a plan to terminate that, right? And when it's going to wrap up. So what are those things that you can choose to consolidate, to reduce, right? We are so apt as advisors to buy that silver bullet, to go to conferences, see the shiny thing, we go spend money on it, we buy it, and we never use it whatsoever. What are those things that you can start cleaning out?
Yeah, and there's a lot of those. And of course, there's other just general good finance things that you would recommend to clients that have spending issues, right? Like renegotiating contracts and things like that. But Micah, where I see it get out of hand is not having a forcing mechanism going in. So each quarter, like most of our revenue comes in quarterly, like a lot of advisors, and I look and I run my profitability for the upcoming quarter. And I say, listen, I have to run at least a 50% profit margin, non-negotiable. Just like I would never run at a negative cash flow, that has to be there. And so I have to make adjustments around that to have that forcing mechanism in place. Now, you can certainly go higher. There are certainly enterprise practices where that needs to be lower. But if you're in sub 3 million in revenue?
Yeah, sub 3 million, solo practice, lifestyle practice kind of side, you should be 50% north of 50% profit margins, right?
Yeah.
If you're in the enterprise practice, man, I would love to see north of those 50% profit margins. But a lot of times just the cost of it really comes in your 40 to 50% on the profit side. And that is work to get there, by the way, but it's totally doable.
Now, real quick, when we say profits on this podcast, we are referring
what
to...
What does that mean?
What does that mean? We are referring to the amount that shows up on your personal tax return divided by the amount that was taken out of the client's accounts. So that's what we call EBOC, earnings before owner's comp. You are welcome to add back in 401k contributions or something similar. Nothing else gets added back. And that car that kind of belongs to the company next to the airplane that sort of belongs...
What about the Augusta rule? It's just my money anyways. Do I get to add that back in? No.
And we can make a case for that, right? The problem is once we start making these exceptions and we start adding back in, and suddenly it's great. We're like, well, you know what? My employee, she's really my personal assistant, so I'm going to back out her salary. Like, you can go anywhere with this stuff. So it's EBOC, earnings before owner's comp, the amount that shows up on your tax return, divided by the amount taken from the client's account. Everything in between there is expense. If $1 million came out of client accounts last year in fees, $500,000 needs to be EBOC or higher. All right, before we get to more good stuff in this episode, a quick word from our sponsors. Hey everybody, today's episode is brought to you by our friends at Belay. You know, the best part of having a virtual assistant from Belay is not the things that they get done that you were already going to do. That is valuable, by the way. It's that list of things that if we're being honest, you need to get to and you're just never going to get it done. Like that doctor's appointment you keep meaning to schedule, or the contractor you need to find for your house to fix that leaky thing, or the flowers you keep meaning to send to your wife. Those are all things that you can give your Belay virtual assistant so that they get done, because we know that, if we're being honest, they're probably not going to get done. Now, how are they going to get done? Because Belay finds virtual assistants, including my own virtual assistant, who are masters at working down tasks lists. They're masters at taking one step ahead of what you're already thinking, right? reach out to Belay, text the letters RIA to 55123 to get a free copy of their ebook. More importantly, to get introduced to my good friend Teresa, who's going to see if you're a good fit for a virtual assistant. Not everyone is. And then find a virtual assistant who's perfectly matched to your needs. So text the letters RIA to 55123. And now back to the episode.
So let's talk about some of your largest expense, right? We started talking about the bottom end, right? Which
is
saying, hey, cancel a card, those little things, etc. Yeah, right. Which is a good place to start because it doesn't hurt. Now let's talk about the top end of your expenses. Probably the most expensive thing you have is employees, then leases and locations, right? So let's talk about employees. So employees is probably going to be your top expenses there. No, I'm not saying fire all of your employees, but what's your hiring plan, right? Versus saying, hey, we need new employees at this. It's all revenue based on us. Now, we put revenue to households when we're talking about with team members, right? Of saying, great, we need X amount more households. Once we hit X amount of more households, then we'll hire a new team member. Now, what I know is, let's say that you're a solo advisor with a one-person team, maybe two-person team, you could be running up to 200, 250 households before you need to hire another person. Pretty darn successfully. Jarvis, would you say that's fair?
Yeah. I want to reemphasize that, right? You need to be hiring that first person, even if they're a fractional person, like through our good friends at Belay. Fractional, you need to hire them as soon as you possibly can, really before you think you can. Yeah, you really do not need to be going to the third person until, the second hire. So it's you, an assistant, maybe one more person. That's going to take you to 150, 200 clients. We're talking $1 million to $3 million in revenue. At that point, you're at a pivoting point and you need to decide, what's my trajectory here? Am I trying to build an enterprise, or do I just want to squeeze as much juice as I can out of a lifestyle practice? But this, Micah, you and I, we see advisors and they'll have 4, 5, 6 employees and they're doing $800,000 in revenue. Like, wait a second, well, there's no money here to cover this thing.
Right.
And there's nothing for these people to be doing is the other thing.
Mm-hmm. That's the other thing too, right? It's not just about the profit side of it. It's what are you hiring them to do to actually get their job done? If you have too many people on a project, they get used to not working. Then you want to grow and you're going to have one heck of a problem because they're used to doing 10% of a job. Now you're asking them to do 70% of a job. Still not 100, by the way, but 70%. And they're going to say, no way, we can't do this work. So setting those good expectations of decent amount of workloads on things that need to get done with your team members is really, really important. So again, Jarvis, same thing. Hire the first one right away. You know what? But the first one, this could be 2 part-time employees. That could still be for sure. One.
Yep.
You know what? Sometimes you can find the unique unicorn that's good in all fronts. Sometimes you got to find people that are 2 part-time employees that are really good in 2 different areas. That's acceptable. We're solving for 1 FTE, right? That's what we're solving for. Yeah. Now, not 10 fractionals to make 1 FTE, but that's what we're going for, is that 1 FTE to hire. Then be really slow, but set your benchmarks in advance. This is another thing that I'm going to say gets messed up with this one, is we don't have benchmarks. So what happens is the team member says, hey, I'm overworked. We went from 100 clients. We went from 50 clients to 100. We've doubled. That means we should double our team, right? And at first glance, you're like, well, I guess we are doubling. And we makes sense. That kind of makes sense. But then you start looking at the workload, says, no, it's really not double the work, right? New clients are definitely more work when they come on. But then after that, there's a whole maintenance thing that you're doing that's pretty scalable with your team. So you got to work with your team members, set up that hiring plan, and be slow to hire. Have the revenue coming in first. Start banking that revenue for that new hire before you actually hire them.
Yeah, and let's remember that Parkinson's law is always in effect, right? Parkinson's law, an activity will take as much time as is allocated. If things will cost as much money as you have, your team will always be busy. Your garage will always be full. Your backpack will always be overflowing. Your laptop, it's everywhere, right? And just a real personal example of this, Micah, right? Going into 2007, 2008, speaking of the financial crisis from earlier, there were 5 people working at Jarvis Financial. Just count again. Yep. 5 people working there on $300,000 of revenue. Now, I know that inflation has changed a lot since then. 5 people does not go into 300,000. It does not. Right. And then the financial crisis hit and several other things happened. Yes. And we had to burn the ships. It went from 5 people to 2 people. Now, 2 people on 300,000 is still a tough number because you have other expenses. I stayed at 2 people until about $1.2 million of revenue. And then we went up from there. Right. Yep. And some of that going up from there was because I was making changes to do the Perfect RIA and other things like that. And I needed more bandwidth, junior advisors, things like that. But I could still to this day, myself and 2 team members, in fact, earlier this year we were that way, or last year, excuse me, myself, 2 team members, we can run a $2 million practice, no problem.
So with that, right, this is another myth that comes out there is saying you need to hire a junior advisor really fast. I know we talked about this a bunch on the podcast, but it's worth talking about right now. It is not until you've reached capacity, and capacity isn't 12 clients, right? Depending on how you want to set this up. And again, you could look at how, we built the Shalansky side of it and my practice side, over 200 clients, still being able to take off about 8 months out of the office and run a highly effective practice with lots of value to clients. So to say that because you have 100 clients, you now need to bring on another advisor, it's not exactly true. So it's really about, where's that big goal? Really, what is your capacity that you have? Until you get probably north of 100 to 150 households, you have enough bandwidth that you can do the marketing and see the clients. Kind of the myth that I hear, Jarvis, is when people have 50 clients, they're like, well, I'm so busy doing marketing, I don't have time to see these clients. If I brought on another junior advisor, then I could spend all the time marketing. So no, let's look at your day. You have more than enough time to actually market and see these 50 clients and your prospects and grow your practice, right? So don't fall into that trap that says, I have to have a junior advisor. Now you're going to look at Matt and Micah and says, what the heck? You guys are hiring advisors. Our practice is at a slightly different stage, right? What we're talking about is where you at. Now, you get to the stage that says, okay, I want to bring on 2 other advisors this year. That's because we can put 150 to 200 prospects through our system every single year. This is proven, by the way, this isn't theory. We can bring those in. We want to grow up multiple advisors. That's kind of our plan, because we've already hit those first base legs first, which created that profitable practice that allows us to pay for the growth. The mistake that gets made is you spend too much time too soon on these employees. You don't make enough money. They leave to go somewhere else, and you really shoot yourself in the foot. We have seen this happen to lots of advisors. We don't want it to happen to you.
Yeah, there's so many pieces to pull apart there. Like one other one that really gets us trapped, and this relates to the junior advisor, but spending money, two things. One is spending money to service clients you don't have, and then the other is throwing money at problems thinking it will solve it. So let's do the first one here. First one is, hey, I think I want to have twice as many clients, therefore we better hire people so we're ready for that. That does not work in real life. When you have them, and again, Mike, I love your benchmarks, right? Like, hey, when we get to 150 clients, then we can hire another person. Not when we dream about getting it, not when we think we're going to get there. Now, if you're a big enterprise practice and there's 40 people and you're bringing, yeah, sure, that's a different story. That's not this podcast, right? You're a solo advisor, you're 2 advisors, do not hire until the people are there. Then the other, it's not the field of dreams. Like if you build it, they will come. That's not how this works. The other is throwing money at problems.
If you build it, you will go broke unless you have the revenue.
The other is throwing money at problems. And I'm often guilty of this. And there is a place, we talk all the time on this podcast, Micah, right, about investing in professional development, investing in quality team members, investing in things. But it's easy to confuse that with throwing money at problems. What we need to do is hire an unproven consultant to give us a software program. Been there, done that. It doesn't work, right? So do not confuse investing in your practice with throwing money into a black hole of Facebook ads or whatever else, hoping it's going to magically transform.
Yeah. And again, this all fits into the profitability side. So we fall victim to this, I think, Jarvis, is that we have good cash flow. We're doing things really well. We're like, what I need to do is, quote, invest in my business, just what you're talking about. And you have this extra discretionary income that you just blow into something because you don't have targeted benchmarks of this 50% plus. So what are your targeted benchmarks that you should have? Again, solo advisor type practice, north of 50% should be your benchmark. And then that has to be the first question. Am I hitting these profitability levels or not? And if you are not, the answer is no. Quit throwing money into black holes. And if you are, then it says, okay, great. How are you going to do this? But then how are you going to measure success? And instead of keep throwing money at it, when do you know to pull the plug on it? One of the things that my sister likes to say, Jamie likes to say, I steamroll over people. It's like, well, you know what? This is my money. It's my choice. But with vendors and whatnot, we have some pretty serious outlines on what they have to do, or I will fire them. And we make it super clear. And I'm not being a jerk about it. It's saying, this is what we agreed to. This is what you're going to produce. If you fail to produce this, I don't need to pay you this money. That means our contracts have that in that language as well, that I can terminate them. This means I'm willing to have an uncomfortable conversation with vendors that want my money in order to make sure that I'm focused on my profitability. And that's 100%. The part that I see a lot of advisors not willing to do, to having that uncomfortable conversation with vendors. Says, no, everything's negotiable. Let's have this conversation. Let's make sure they can actually deliver. And if they can, you need to part ways as friends, but quit paying them money.
Yeah, especially in the creative space, right? Like websites, logos, branding, marketing, this kind of stuff that's really kind of a dark art. In fact, Mike, I was curious if anything else came to mind for you when you think, boy, here's where either I've thrown money into a dark hole and it hasn't worked, or I see other advisors. I know one that comes to mind for me. I famously paid a ton of money for a personal brand, and we had these fancy trifold brochures. that all eventually ended up in the garbage can. But I was convinced, right? Because it was a very convincing sales pitch. If only I had these fancy brochures, then my practice would succeed. And we got those fancy brochures and nothing happened. Turns out that wasn't it. But Mike, I'm curious, any other ones come to mind? Because it's easy to say like, hey, don't throw money into dark holes. But it never felt like a dark hole when I was throwing money into it, right? It felt like the mecca, like the beacon of all life, right?
So what I want to see when I make it, here's my formula for making this decision, Jarvis, right? Is number one is, has this worked in another advisor's office to be successful? Not, is this advisor successful and have they done it?
Oh,
that's
man, so
different,
important.
that's a huge distinction right here, right?
Yep.
That's for those beautiful brochures. That was how we fell prey to this as well, right? Is because what happened is this other advisor was really successful, had these same things, and we did them. Then we found out he's like, yeah, it was a big waste of money. I never should have done it. But I never thought to ask that question. So now when I'm looking at testimonials or references, when someone has, I want to contact them and say, hey, when you did this, show me what growth you had with this. Now, if they can't show me, this probably means they didn't have it, right? So I really want to see, was this activity tied to growth, or did you just happen to grow and happen to have this activity at the same time? So that's one distinction. Second one that was really important for me, Jarvis, took me forever to do, is let's say another advisor is going to do this activity. They spent money on it and it was tied to their success and it was really good.
Yeah.
But I'm not willing to do that activity.
Oh, yeah.
Why would I spend money on it? And I'm going to pick on you, right? So one of the things that you do really, really well, you do networking and centers of influence really well.
Yeah.
And so this is before you and I met. I spent a lot of money on learning how to do networking and centers of influence, and I made zero money on this activity because I hated doing it. This wasn't something that just sucked it up. I mean, my energy was negative. I'm not that much of an extrovert. I don't enjoy those types of things.
Yeah.
And so I got zero results from it. So then I had to learn, after hundreds of thousands of dollars, these two things. Is number one, is someone else doing it and did that attribute to their success? And number two, is this an activity I'm willing to do? And if it's not an activity I'm willing to do, I will pass, and I need to go find one I am willing to do.
That's a really good example, Mike. I think another variation on that is, do I think that this is a shortcut? So anytime that you're throwing money at something and you think it's a shortcut to hard work, not going to work. And an example would be, and I thought about, because you're talking about, you do a lot of seminars, in-person seminars, and you're very good, but you're also like incredibly practiced at it. I've seen you rehearse. I've seen you watch the videos of yourself. And for people that haven't done that, you think, oh, that's not a big deal. It's soul crushing. It's like one of the worst things in the world, like put nails under my fingernails. But you're willing to put that work in. And so what happens is I'll meet advisors and they say, I'm going to start doing seminars like Micah or like Brian or like Ben or like some of our friends. Cool. How many times are you going to practice that? Well, not really at all. Okay, this is not going to work. Let me save you the money, right? Same with the brochures. I thought I could have these brochures. I could send them out in the mail. I wouldn't have to call people. I wouldn't have to close the deals. They would just come to me. That's never going to work. Same with a website. If you're not going to do the work, a podcast is a great example. You can pay for the best podcast producers, the best promotion of podcasts. If you're not going to put the reps in week after week after week, it ain't never going to work. You're just going to be out the money.
So Jarvis, like one of the things that comes up, I was just thinking about the seminars. So when we have these other advisors that were growing in our practice as well, we did the same, but we've been doing it for so long, I had really just forgotten all of the little things that we do to prepare for the seminars, that at first we weren't setting our other team members, our other advisors up for success. So now we have a pretty detailed calendar broken down that says, okay, this is the section you are going to learn. This is when we're backwards planning it, right? This is when you're going to present it to the entire team. This is when you're going to present it to the advisors. This is when you have to know all the stuff, right? And by the way, you should be able to do this with no slides, with no handouts, with no notes, right? If you have little like 3x5 cards and you're up there presenting, you have failed, right? The power should be able to go out and you continue with the presentation. And if you cannot, you have not mastered these slides, you still need to practice. Now you're saying, holy crap, that's a lot of work. Yes, it is. Being successful is hard. Right? So this is a choice that we're going to make. So how does this kind of tie into the profitability standpoint? You got to take that same dedication that you're going to put into these activities into expenses that you have. Is this going to make money? This is a business. We're not doing this just for fun, right? Is this going to be profitable? And if not, we got to kill that activity and move on to the next thing.
Yeah, and do top performers in every field have a lot of resources, right? Like Micah, you obviously have a lot of resources to put at events. Now, that was not always the case.
Not always the case.
Right? It was the case. And we talked about this. Actually, you and I just recorded a series of videos where we talked about like how brutal our personal budgets were, trying to squeeze out pennies to cover credit cards that were due so that we could try to do another seminar. Like it always looks like, oh, they just bought these brochures and everything was easy. Nope. They worked worked like crazy. So I guess, Micah, we've got a long ways from profitability into like just the realities of life. Yeah, it's really do hard things. Like money will not substitute for hard things. Hard things plus money, that's pretty fun. That's incredible. But money without hard things is not going to happen. You're just going to be out of money.
So, Jarvis, let's go through and just kind of talk about action items, right? This podcast is all about our action. And so one of the things...
philosophies.
It's our rant for the day. All right. So one of the things that's just really, really important as we start focusing on this is going to be, what are your benchmarks, right? Yes. Now you have what we think they should be. Guess what? It's your practice. You get to make your own.
Go for it.
If you're a solo, it's north of 50%. If it's now, like I said, north of 50%, if you're just starting out in the first couple of years of the business, you don't have a 50% profit margin. That's your goal of where you want to be. You're at flatline to nothing as you're putting everything back into the practice to growing. So I get that, right? After you kind of have the 50 plus clients and you're kind of rolling for a few years, now you should be targeting this 50%. And that's how you should be making your decisions. If you're an enterprise practice, then it's that 40 to 50% marker that you should be kind of looking at as well.
Yeah, boy, great on that. Even if you're in this growth stage, Mike, this is something I learned from you years ago. Still pay that money out of the business into your personal account, right, as your profits. And then if you say, hey, I do want to do this growth mechanism, then write the check from your personal account back into your business. Now, you might think like that's a left pocket, right pocket, left pocket. It is. But it's a lot different than, hey, we have the money in the business account versus I got to pull money out of my personal account and move it back into the business account. So that's a great way to do that. Related, I would say, Micah, action number 2, you've got to have a real detailed P&L that you're sharing with someone else. Now, maybe you're coming to our Invictus Mastermind in a couple of weeks and we're going to share those and really pick those through, or you're coming to a different mastermind. You have to have somebody that you trust, that you respect, pick that thing apart and say, hang on a second, you are blind. In fact, Micah, you and I were literally just doing this like 2 weeks ago. You and I were doing some work together and we were looking through my client list, names removed on clients that had fee billing exceptions. Right. And each one in my mind had this great story. Like, Jarvis, what about this one? I'm like, there can't be that many. Like, well, I've got the list right here. I sorted them. Oh, there's 27, whatever it is. You gave me the list. No, it's got to be the wrong list. Let me go. Because I were tempted to monkey with this thing. Like, well, those. So you've got to create that P&L statement and you've got to have a financial addressing with somebody who can call you out on your crap.
Yeah, really, really important. Now, we're talking about cutting expenses, but one of the things that's really huge in profitability is investing in your PD, your professional and personal development. So make sure you have these things on your calendar. Masterminds are an absolute must. They're a pain in the butt. They got to take time out of your office. You got to fly there. You got to go there. You got to show up and be accountable. You got to do the work. Yeah, it's work, but they're transformational. So make sure you're joining us on a mastermind to help transform your practice. Invest in your PD. Super, super important.
I love it. Last and final action item, of course, always give us 5 stars. It really helps the podcast grow, spreads the message. But join us on February 21st, upcoming our nation webinar on how to double your practice, which includes doubling your profits in the next 36 months. This is not an arbitrary figure, but it's a target that Mike and I routinely hit in our practices and ones that we help other advisors hit as well. So send a quick email to lifestyle@theperfectria.
Jarvis, as always, it's a pleasure, bud. Until next time, happy planning.
Happy planning. Hey, before you leave, a quick word from our sponsors. Hey, everybody, I want you to take a quick look around your office, and on your desk, there should be the Retirement Tax Services Desktop Tax Guide. And if it's not there, or if it's not current, meaning you didn't download it in the last month, go to retirementtaxservices.com and download the Desktop Tax Guide. This is a must-have resource for every financial advisor committed to tax planning.
Information designed to change lives. Financial planning can make you thrive. Start today, don't think twice.